I love technology. I'm an early adopter of technology. I bought my first computer when I was in third grade. And I was a high school principal as technology and the internet came into kids' pockets. And I have a view of it as a school administrator without having his own kids. And now I've got 3 kids coming up the ranks, and I've got a view of how I introduce technology into my family. I'm excited about the topic tonight to hear from our speakers. And I would like to invite up Miss Sinisi, our elementary principal. Bow your heads with me as I open in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for being active in everything that happens in our lives. Thank you for these parents who came tonight to learn about introducing technology to their kids. I ask that everybody who is here comes away with several good ideas of how to be better tech-wise parents to the kids that you have blessed them with. I ask that you be with our speakers tonight. You allow them to clearly speak the message that you have laid upon their heart. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right, well, thank you for coming tonight. We're going to be talking specifically about some of the dangers and harm that could come from technology. If there weren't any harm, we wouldn't have to have this talk, and we could have free reign forever. But there are some. So we're going to be talking about that tonight and giving you some proactive tools and strategies to address it. Our goal is that we open up the conversation, start it here, continue it down the road, and just be able to navigate this road together as we go. I'm interested in this topic because I am an elementary school principal. I'm the principal here at Redwood Christian, and I've seen the impact of technology on kids over the last decade plus of working with them. But I've also seen the impact of technology on my own life and needing to put in some more healthier practices in my own life. And in fact, this book was one that really opened my eyes to that, and so I would recommend this one for everyone. It's really approachable and easy read, but it helps explain the habits of technology, developing a rhythm of life and how you interact with it versus just like a set of rules. But it's called The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch. So that is kind of one reason why I wanted to be able to put forth this information for you all tonight. And joining me is Deb Goodson. She's going to come on up. She is a mom of kids in elementary, middle, and high school. Yeah. And so she has firsthand experience with this, with kids in her own home, but also 20 plus years of ministry experience and a heart to do life well in a way that honors Jesus. So put that all together, and she's wanting to learn more about this as well. And she's going to kick off the night, so take it away.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, so like she said, my name is Deb Goodson, and I currently have a 16, 14, and 11-year-old. I think the 11-year-old is technically now a tween. So in terms of kind of what we're talking about tonight, I'm right in the thick of it. And I want to start by saying I do not have it figured out. I am not perfect. Our family definitely has a lot of areas to grow. Even last night, after putting my daughter's device in a special place to charge, I was working on this in my office, and I go out and thinking, oh, wait, where did it go? And sure enough, she had taken her phone back to her room at 10:30 to text some more. So I just say that to say that this is a conversation that we're excited to have tonight and to continue to grow in as a community. So to get started, we wanted to start with vision. And I think on any good topic, starting with vision is the way to go. And so what we would love for you to do is to think about, what do you want your child to be like the day that they graduate high school? And to do that, we want you to take out your notes, take 3 people next to you, so small little groups. We want you to write down about 10 words, maybe adjectives, maybe some short phrases that would describe the type of person you want your child or your children collectively to be like, to look like, to have virtues and characteristics the day they graduate high school. We're going to take just 3 or 4 minutes. Talk with your neighbors and share what you've written down. Okay, I trust you wrote a couple things down. If not, you can continue to jot down ideas. If you didn't get a chance, honestly, I encourage you to think about it. Because what is most likely to happen without a vision is the easier route is taken, right? It's easier to allow our kids to not brush their teeth in the morning, not make their beds, not, which our pastor was sharing about, and that happens to my kids as well, not watch too much TV, skip their chores, not do the things that we want them to do because we're busy. We all have a lot going on, and it's easier just to kind of just allow whatever to happen. And I actually think what we're talking about tonight requires a ton of work in regards to parenting and heavy lifting. It is not easy, but I think it'll be worth it. And whenever I do something that's really hard, if the vision is before me of what I want to see happen in 5 years or 10 years, or the day that my kids graduate, get married, or whatever, then I keep going when the going gets rough. And so I encourage you to firm up your foundation for your kids' character. I think some of the most powerful choices that we make are not necessarily specific decisions, but more so patterns and habits. And this is something that I think we can help our kids do. They don't naturally do this. And with technology, there are so many forces that are helping to dictate, in a sense, to our children what to do and how to do it, how long to play, what to look at. And as parents, we need to enter in and say, okay, do these things help my child get to that vision, let's say, on the day that they graduate? Because I think life is about choices. There's trade-offs. If you do one thing, you're not doing another thing. If you invest your time and efforts and energy here, you have nothing left to do that over here. And so we need to be very proactive with our kids of like, okay, what do we really want for them, and how can we help them get there? So some scriptures I think can help guide us. The first one here is Ephesians 5:15 through 16. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. A similar one, I think, in regards to our character formation is do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. See, as we've already mentioned, we don't think technology is bad, and we definitely don't think that it's the enemy. The enemy is, in fact, the enemy. And yet, I think there's ways in which the enemy has used technology for ill. But to remind us why technology is good, honestly, it's really good to be able to call 911, for instance. On my son's, just his iCloud texting phone, he can't actually call 911. So I'm like, okay, if there's a fire at the house, let's hope the neighbor can help him call 911. Or texting your kid to pick them up, or where they're going or what they're doing. Helping your kids stay in touch with their friends. The reality is that most kids have devices or some way of connection. And I know as I've made harder decisions to withhold, later it's harder for them to actually connect with their friends and text. So technology does help with that. I think education is a great place, whether that be online research, e-textbooks, note-taking, whatever it might be. I'm using an iPad right now. It's a big part of how we can grow. And to be honest, many jobs and careers in the future for our children will be based around technology. This is just a fact, and we need to help them and prepare them for 2054 and 2074 down the road. The other thing here is that we need to train our kids to be thriving adults, that they're going to be adults someday. And in fact, I think that day is coming faster than we can possibly believe. For me, I have 7 years left until my last kid is gone, which sometimes feels like a very, very long time. And other times I'm like, that'll happen in a matter of seconds. And so what does it look like not just to shelter them from negative influences, but to spend those 7 years, to spend the moments I have left training them to be the adults, the college students, the adults, the parents someday that I hope that they will be. I think a verse that has really helped me in terms of even this idea of training is Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. See, we're not saying no technology, but as we want our kids to grow with Christ, I think that's why we're all here tonight. We're saying slow technology with healthy guidelines, that we're being strategic, we're being thoughtful, and we're doing the hard work as parents so our kids don't have to bear the brunt of it. Another good one, which I'm really glad that it starts out this way, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. We should add in mothers there too. But bring them up in discipline and instruction in the Lord. I think this is a good one that honestly is very convicting, because sometimes I provoke my kids to anger with various decisions we've made. In the past, we used to take off our daughter's door when she would make very bad decisions regarding sometimes technology and other things. And that would actually provoke her to anger. We don't do that anymore. But there are things where it's like, okay, let's rethink that. Maybe that didn't go exactly as planned. But this whole last part here, discipline and instruction in the Lord, this is where discipline doesn't happen overnight. Discipline doesn't happen without really, really hard work, without saying no, without grit, without perseverance, without actually some level of sacrifice. If you think about something in your life, a goal that you've had, that you've accomplished, whether that be running a marathon or finishing grad school, whatever it is, most likely took a lot of hard work. And I think what discipline and instruction in the Lord is that it's difficult for us and even for our kids, but the reward and the payoff is great. So Megan's going to talk a little bit about some of the harms.
Yeah, if we're wanting to produce that discipline in them, I guess the question is like, why? What is the reasons? What are the ill effects that are out there? So there are a few of them that are on the screen. Some of them are common sense, such as it's a time waster. Like, yes, I think we've all experienced technology being a time waster in our own lives, right? Even like, I'll get on Pinterest looking for recipes and spend an hour and a half, like looking for recipes. How did that happen, right? So we know it's a time waster. And if we're thinking as parents who want to build discipline in our kids of interacting with technology in healthy ways, we got to think the interactions and practices that they're forming with technology that they're using as a child, right? Are we letting them waste their time on technology? That practice is going to follow them into adulthood. They'll grow into adulthood being like, oh yeah, I can waste time on technology, like did it my whole life long. So we want to be showing them, hey, this is a danger that could come from it. And then thinking about social media impact. We'll go into this one really in depth later, but just as a little tidbit, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the store Sephora, which sells like makeup and skincare products for the men in this room, Sephora lately has had a surge of children, girls ages 9 to 12, storming their doors for skincare products, anti-aging products for their 9-year-old skin, which actually some dermatologists will say might harm their 9-year-old skin. Like they don't need it. And we wonder why the sudden uptick in kids going to Sephora, and it's linked back to TikTok. These TikTok influencers are sharing their get ready with me routine for the morning and all that they're doing, and these kids are being influenced by it. Maybe not directly like, hey, go buy this product, but this is what they're watching, video after video of people doing certain things, and then boom, they're influenced and they want to do the same thing. Thinking about stranger danger in the same way that you wouldn't invite a random stranger into your home to have a play date with your child, you wouldn't want them to have access to a stranger online. I remember when I was a kid, the PSA I heard on the news was, it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are? And today's PSA needs to be, it's 10 o'clock, do you know who your kids are online with? Do we know who they might be encountering on the other side of that screen? And then inappropriate content. Of course, I'm sure we can know what types of inappropriate content they could be reaching online, but we also need to think about how accessible is that to them really? We've had some of our TK students, our youngest here, 4 years old, being able to tell us proudly how they can access the internet by pressing that little button to where it then beeps and asks you, yes, right? Siri, Alexa, they know how to use these voice-activated controls. They've seen mom and dad do it, and they can do it. And they can access whatever their little mouth might say. Their ignorant, innocent little mouth might say, but it's going to bring up a wealth of information that we might not be ready for them to access. And then thinking about screen time addiction. We kind of talked about that, similar to a time waster, but it can develop into something that seems so compulsive that it's hard to break the tie on. So these are just some of the things we want to think about. And then you might think, well, okay, I know about those dangers, so I'm going to give my kids the kid-safe version. We only use YouTube Kids. Well, that's great. It does save them from a plethora of things. But in less than 30 minutes, we were able to find also a plethora of things that we probably wouldn't want our kids to watch. And that just autoplay video after video on YouTube Kids. The one in the corner here of this lovely girl is a whole video on how to teach young girls to pose in a more attractive way. I don't think we need that. I don't want that at my elementary school. I don't need these girls learning how to use their body in that way. And while we're talking about these dangers, something we need to be clear on is that it's not possible to create an internet-safe home, one that's completely safe, completely sheltered. A child will have no harm come from the internet. You can't do that. And even if you could for your house, you can't do it for Target, where songs might be playing, or they might walk past somebody who's watching something on their phone or whatnot. But you can create a home that is safer, and that's what we want to talk about tonight. What are those practices that we can put in place that will give our kids a safer experience? So we'll be talking through how to respond to the dangers of the internet and personal devices in a confident, Christ-like, and caring manner for our children. And we have to, because we're called to live differently. In Titus 2, it says this, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age." That applies to this age too, even though it was written thousands of years ago. "Waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ." So because we are called by God and called to live this way, renouncing ungodliness and worldly passions, we do it because we have a blessed hope. We have a Savior. We have somebody who's called us out of the mire of the world and to live for Him. So as we talk about some of the harm that comes from the internet or too much time on our devices, you might actually find, as I found in planning for tonight, a lot of this actually applies to me. Like not just these kids or teenagers that we're talking about, but Megan Sinisi. And I just want to free you up to think about that. Don't push that away and say, oh no, I'm just here for my children. Let's be here for us too and see where are the ways that we need to be challenged to have a healthier relationship with technology where it's not running our lives or allowing us access to things that we shouldn't be accessing. We'll be sharing a fair amount of resources and tips for parenting in today's digital age, but there are two things that are going to continue as a running theme throughout all that we're talking about tonight. And the first is the power of conversation. Your most powerful tool isn't necessarily a specific router. It's not parental controls that you could put on your kid's phone. It's not taking away devices altogether. Your most powerful tool you'll have against the evil that kids could encounter through these things is consistent and persistent conversations. You won't always be there to protect your child, and they may not always tell you about what they've encountered. But if you've laid that foundation where you can talk about these kinds of things and they feel the freedom to come to you, or they've talked about it before they encounter it, then they're much more apt to know how to respond to it when the moment comes. And if you don't talk to your kids about it, someone else will. Google would love to. YouTube, love to. TikTok, ready, waiting, 24/7, they're available. So please be available before they are. You might be wondering, how do I start the conversation? Well, there are a couple of ideas on the screens here, just general questions that you can get going with your kids. I keep wanting to say students. For you, they are children. There's a QR code to the full article from Common Sense Media that links these questions. That QR code's in your notes, so you can have access to that. But another amazing resource is Axis. Axis provides parents many different cultural resources to help bridge the gap between teens and the home. But one of the ones that I find most helpful is their parent guides. They're on a bunch of different topics. I listed a few of them up there. But these parent guides educate you on what that topic is. They offer advice on how to handle it, how to respond to it, what preventative measures to maybe put in place. They give a biblical foundation for how to think about it, and then even some questions and ways to get the discussion going with your child. So as we cover various topics tonight, be thinking about how you can get the conversation going in each of these different topics that we're going to talk about. How can you use that most powerful tool you have of consistent and persistent conversations? And the other thread that's going to be running through our night tonight is that of how the brain develops, and I'm going to pass that off to Deb.
So Megan asked me to tackle this section, and this was my major in college, but that was a really, really, really long time ago, and I've done nothing with it since. But we're going to take a little step into a neuroscience lesson. And I think it's helpful because what we're telling you tonight are not just our ideas or tips or kind of what we do in our homes, but we're trying to back it up with science and research. And I think looking into why and how the brain functions the way it does actually might give you new ideas of how you want to parent your kids. So put on your thinking caps. We're going to go back to science and learn a little bit. This next slide here I find to be a great foundation of why we want to look at the science. So in 2021, Common Sense Media took a recent survey to better understand how the pandemic affected tweens and teens. Just look at these numbers here. 5 hours and 33 minutes for tweens, 8 hours and 39 minutes for teens. And that is time on screens of any kind, not including homework, so probably not at school. I don't know how many hours of a day your children are at home, but I think this covers a lot of them, right? Outside of school, outside of sports and activities time. And I think if you have teens or tweens at home, maybe even younger kids, maybe you've noticed this, that themselves or their friends are constantly on devices. So I don't know where your kids might fall into this, but it is very, very, very normal that teens and tweens across the country are spending a ton of time on devices. And so how might this affect their brains? How might this affect their well-being? Well, we're going to jump in, like I said, into a little bit of a science lesson here. So looking at the prefrontal cortex. Maybe that's something that you remember from an old science class, but it's the frontal lobe at the front of your head and the front part of the frontal lobe. So right here, it is what does your executive functioning. Here are some things here that the prefrontal cortex is in charge of. Focusing attention, solving problems, anticipating and predicting the consequences of one's actions. That's key to become an adult. Balancing short-term rewards and future goals. Impulse control and managing one's emotions, planning for the future, conditional thinking. So these are very important things that you want your brain and your child's brain to be able to do. It's not fully developed until age 25, and so in this time of parenting your kids at home, it is very important that you see their brain kind of like you see their body as something to steward, something to grow, something to help them develop in a healthy way. And so because their brains are not fully developed, particularly their prefrontal cortex, we need to be even more careful with, I think, the influences of internet, influences of electronic screens, video games, texting, YouTube, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera. Because when they're overexposed to those types of things, the stress hormone cortisol, I'm sure you heard of that, it is released, and the prefrontal cortex, the blood that is helping you to make executive functioning, decision-making like this, it leaves that part of the brain to go back to the back part of the brain that deals with breathing and swallowing and basic vital functions of life. So when our kids or ourselves are overstimulated, there is a lessening effect of how we can actually do these very important tasks. Your child who's not able to delay instant gratification to, let's say, get a homework assignment done tomorrow because there's something happening tonight, or there's a game that they need to play, or even a show to watch, they're not really able to utilize their prefrontal cortex well. And I think this is where parenting comes into play. We actually need to, in fact, maybe be their prefrontal cortex, help them make wise decisions, because sometimes they're just not able to because they're kids. And I think that is the role of a parent. Okay, another key lesson here are neurotransmitters. I'm sure you've heard of some of these words like dopamine and serotonin. These are somewhat common, I think, in vernacular because, I think with, let's say, antidepressants, many of them, not all, but they want to increase serotonin levels, right? In fact, there's not really a lot of evidence out there that you can have too much serotonin. And serotonin, as you see here, regulates mood. It tells the brain, I'm good, I'm ready to take a break. You can utilize your prefrontal cortex. The problem sometimes with screens and technology is the dopamine, because dopamine is, as again you may have heard too, it's the pleasure reward center. As you experience pleasure or you fulfill a desire, dopamine is released into your brain in the synapses. It's a normal thing, so there's receptors, the dopamine neurotransmitter attaches to it, and you get a little pleasure buzz, if you will. But over time, overstimulation, your brain actually knows, hey, we need to overcompensate for what's going on here. Receptors are taken out. They're gone. They're no longer as many receptors. So what has to happen is that you have to actually have more dopamine in your system, in these synapses, because there's not as many receptors. And that's why 15 minutes of videos turns into 40 minutes, turns into an hour. That's why gaming continues and continues on in longer amounts of time. And that's why you see people in their 20s addicted, let's say, to video games, because over time, they didn't start out there. But over time, their need for a dopamine release increased so much that they just need to get that next fix. And there's a lot of corresponding evidence, which we'll get to, with addiction and different kinds of addiction unrelated to some of these things we're talking about. But I think if there's anything to say here is that our brains are delicate, and God has given us them, just like the rest of our bodies, to steward and to treat with care. And so, before I go into this part here, the last one I want to talk about is myelin. So myelin is the white matter in your brain. There's gray matter, there's also white matter. And the white matter is what causes, with more and more synapses that are connecting, the transmitters that are going, and there's connectivity. There is myelination, and it helps you have higher functioning and quick thinking. If you need myelination, it's actually a very good thing. And in order to grow and to become, I think, more even higher functioning, this needs to happen. And yet, there's a lot of evidence that excessive amounts of dopamine and exposure to overstimulation cuts down your myelination. It reduces your ability to actually function at that level. And so there's tons of evidence, and you can do quick Google searches even to read more. But here are some ways, I think, to make this practical. And this is from the book Screen Kids, which I think is phenomenal, by Gary Chapman. It's a quick read. It was written just a few years ago. But there's 5 things here to strengthen your child's brain. And they're honestly not that difficult if you just think about how you can incorporate these into your given week or month. The first is downtime. Downtime is actually really important for all of us. Time to rest, time to actually not do anything. Parents love to plan activities for their kids, or kids love to do whatever, but sometimes it's really good to be bored, to actually be quiet, to actually let your brain rest. And this encourages time to explore, time to just be. And this strengthens your child's brain. It helps build things back up. Physical exercise. This is kind of a no-brainer, but 60 minutes a day. Get your kids out there. Maybe they don't play sports. At my house, they can pick weeds. They can do lots of different things. They can walk the dog. Whatever it is, get them outside, because this is a stress reducer, right? There's tons of evidence that getting active, being active, is extremely helpful for actually your brain, not just your body. Unstructured play. This is one of my favorite ones that we have taken seriously at my home, because they can use their creativity and grow in curiosity with unstructured play. The best jobs, I think, moving forward are ones that require innovation, brainstorming, and problem solving. The only way to get good at those things, I think, as a kid, is to have unstructured play, where you're solving problems, you're figuring things out, you're creating stories, you have a whole, wealth of opportunity in your bedroom to just make things up. But you're utilizing your brain in ways that a lot of other activities, and even sometimes structured school, doesn't allow it to be easily done. So unstructured play is easy. You don't have to plan anything. It's very easy. Sleep, 8 to 9 hours a night for tweens, teens, maybe more for kids, younger kids. When our pediatrician told my teenager 9 hours of sleep, I'm like, oh, that's actually really difficult at my house. But sleep is essential, I think, for regulation of their emotions and being able to function well in school. So get your kids to bed. The last one here is eat healthy foods. This is hard, I know. I think for me sometimes, in fact, tonight I was like, okay, mac and cheese. I don't have a lot of time. I'm running here and there. And my son, he's like, well, I just read that book that you had open, and it says eat healthy foods. And I'm like, okay, not tonight. But most of the time, we need to have nutrients. We need to have vegetables. We need to have protein, healthy carbs. And this is a way that you can help steward your child's brain. Lastly, here are tips. So we have 4 sets of tips. This is the first one, based a little bit on our brain development here. But encourage your child when you see them making good decisions. When you see your child turn the TV off, when you see your child put the phone away and not go back and get it, when you see your child do anything, well, honestly, anything at all, but specifically around the technology, say, hey, I just noticed you did that. And I think that it was a great decision, and I'm really proud of you. And honestly, I think the more encouragement and affirmation when they're making good decisions, it actually helps with some of the ways in which you're critiquing or giving feedback or instructing. So encourage where you can. Help them follow through on the agreed upon boundaries and house rules. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in parenting and co-parenting, but hopefully you have rules and standards and house rules that you're asking them to follow. Better yet, create them together. But at times, we need to help them follow these things. We need to actually say, hey, it's actually 8:30 or it's 9 o'clock or whatever time that you set, whatever it is, 7 o'clock. I'm going to help you say no if you can't. Charge your child's phone in your room. I already told you, that's a great one. And sneaky kids will still find a way to get it, but you can at least start there. Have a firm cutoff time for screen time. Going to bed at least an hour, maybe longer, after turning off even our own phones is really helpful. And it actually has to do with blue light. Blue light in the past was only seen during the day. The blue light from our phones gets our bodies going. It's hard for the melatonin to kick in. I can't forget if it's increased or decreased. Regardless, anyone who wants to go to bed should turn off their devices and screens 1 hour before that. And then lastly, maybe have a family phone that your child can borrow. There's 3 things that we want to talk about with this as a foundation moving forward. And they're kind of big ones. They're, I would say, a little bit of a big whammy in the middle there. But social media, sex and porn, and then screen time. So Megan, take it away.
All right, and I did hear that the QR code for submitting questions was kind of not working for a while, but it's reactivated. So if you want to submit your questions there as we go through the night, we'll have a panel of people answering them afterwards. And if you want to include your name on any of those questions, you'll be entered for a giveaway when we come to that time. All right, social media. You may not personally use the social media apps that your kids use, or maybe you do. But I wonder if you've ever tried them with the curiosity and naivety of a child or a teenager. We're going to be talking through some of the impact that these services have on our lives. Some are chronic issues, things that impact us every time we open this social media app. And some are more severe issues that may not happen, but could. And so we're going to address both of them. Starting with the chronic issues, the first is a distorted view of community. They give you the illusion of connection. It might temporarily relieve that feeling of loneliness to push things out into the social media world, but it doesn't actually fix that need for loneliness or isolation that you're having. You're having a need for a real, deep connection, real-life connection, and it's not there. I don't know if anybody in here uses Snapchat, but Snapchat has a feature of a snap streak that happens once you start sending messages back and forth with the same person. And if you send a photo and they send a photo for so many days in a row, you're on a snap streak, you get a little flame by your name, and then as many days as you keep it going, you get a little number, and it might get up into the hundreds. And now that you have a number at like 150 and it's snap streak going, like there's no way you're gonna let that die out on you not sending that photo. It starts actually creating a little bit of anxiety, and you're like, gotta send that photo, gotta keep this snap streak going. But in the same regard, it kind of reduces that friendship to the number 150. Like, what is that friendship really? Yeah, you've been sending pictures back and forth, but when your pet dies, like, who's gonna be there to help you through it? Is it gonna be your TikTok followers, your snap streak friends? Be Real does the same thing with Be Real streaks, and I think it's just something that we have to be aware of. Are we letting these types of friendships that we're having take the place of real in-depth friendships, or are they something extra and beyond that? Another thing thinking about this illusion of real connection is we start anticipating the next ping, the next text, the next like on our photo, the next follower that we're going to get, and we start thinking that all of those things really is what's giving us worth. And those are the people that might value us or think highly of us, but really they don't really know us. They know the version of us that we're willing to put forth, but they don't actually know who we are, and their love and bonds can only go so far. If you have a crisis in life, it's going to be flesh and blood friends, your family, who show up. So when do we take the time to develop those relationships if we're giving all of our time to social media? Another chronic issue that might come up is a distorted view of self, and this is coming through social comparison. And it might happen in a more removed way when you're comparing yourself with society or influencers by seeing what's popular on TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Be Real, all these things. So you might compare yourself with those far removed people. There have been countless times where I'm suddenly like, I need new rugs in every room of my house just because I've been scrolling Instagram. I'm like, I don't need new rugs. Like, no, but nobody cares about that. But I've been watching all these lovely decorated houses, right? And in the same way that affects me, of course it's going to be affecting our younger minds as well, right? And so regardless of if it's a straightforward ad in the middle of the feed or if it's just the way that this TikToker or YouTuber is living, it's going to have an influence. And we're going to start wondering, like, am I living up to what I should be? Where is my worth? What is my value? Am I cool enough? Am I popular enough? And our standard for that has become what we're seeing on social media. You might also have comparison hit a little closer to home with your friend group. They may see pictures of all of their friends out doing something. I don't know what the kids are doing these days, mini golf? No, I don't know. Anyway, they might all be out doing something and be like, why wasn't I invited to that? How come I'm not there? And now we've got a little wall or wedge in our friend group there. Or they might see, somebody's perfect face on every single photo. It's actually a filter. They're not aware. Large number of likes on somebody else's photo, a large number of followers on somebody else's account. It contributes all this to this lower view of self, and it feeds a desire that they have to measure up to what they're seeing on Instagram, which again is only what people want to put forward. They're not showing all the real parts of their lives. They're showing the best parts of their lives, the parts they're willing to be vulnerable with. And I think that's something that we have to talk to our kids about. We'll get to that in a little bit. The opportunities for social comparison on social media really are limitless. But one thing that I want to think about when that social comparison starts happening is our mood and how it affects that. In 2014, they did a study on Facebook's emotional consequences. It was published in the Journal of Computers and Human Behavior. And it studied 3 different sets of participants and had these findings. The longer that people are on Facebook, the more negative their mood is. And they found that not only did Facebook create that social comparison effect, but people ended up judging it as less meaningful, less useful, a waste of time, as in comparison to just browsing the internet in general. And yet, we still go back to it, right? I mean, I'm sure you felt it. I get done with like a 30-minute session of scrolling social media. I'm like, oh man, I just don't feel good. It's like that same thing of craving a milkshake at 10 p.m. I'm like, this is going to be great. No matter that every time I've done this previously in my adult life, it's not ended great. I still think it's going to be great, and I do it again. It's euphoric recall, right? You remember one good part of it, but you forget all of the pain or damage that can come after that. It's that dopaminergic temptation that overrides the you should know better prefrontal cortex. And so we return to scrolling through social media. Those are some of the chronic issues that could impact us every time that we're opening social media or our kids. But there are also severe issues that may not happen every time, but are much more far-reaching. The first is the first is inappropriate content, and I briefly tested Instagram's no nudity rules, but cannot show you the photos that were able to be found. So even when we think, oh, this is going to be fine, like evil has a way, right, of getting around things. So of course they could encounter inappropriate content through these apps. But other more severe things happen through strangers that are online. People can be anybody that they want to be online, and not only does that mean that your child could portray themselves however they want to be, but they could end up interacting with somebody who is totally not who they claim to be. I heard an interview with a man named Brian Montgomery, who was interviewed because his son Walker committed suicide as a result of sextortion. Walker was in high school, and around midnight one night, got a DM through Instagram from a girl, what he thought was a local-ish high school girl. She starts chatting about easy things. Oh, you go to such and such high school? Oh, I know these people that go there. Oh, you play football. Oh, I play volleyball. La, 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 casual conversation at first. Eventually, it turns into a sexual conversation, and they end up video chatting inappropriate acts together on that video. And once that ended, she informed Walker that she had recorded this and gave him the proof of that and said that she was going to be sending it to his friend list on Instagram unless he were to give her $1,000. He didn't have $1,000. Pressure kept coming. Oh, look, I found your mom's Instagram. I'm going to send it to her. No, don't do that. That would be the end of me. I would never be able to forgive myself. And then this person just piled on the shame with Walker. Yeah, you never should forgive yourself. You're terrible. How could you do this? And eventually encouraged Walker to take his own life, which is what he ended up doing. When the FBI came to investigate this case, and looked through his phone and all of his belongings. They didn't find any signs of depression or anxiety or suicidal ideations as they might find in other cases. It truly seemed like this all came on since midnight. And in a span of 4 hours, the Montgomery family's lives were forever changed. I'm not trying to be alarmist in sharing this or like totally freak you out, but I think we got to be aware that sextortion is something that's becoming more and more popular. And there are countless cases, if you go online and look it up, that are happening to our youth. And it's something that you need to talk to your kids about. And you need to let them know. If they're on social media, you need to let them know. This is a potential. Somebody could potentially do this to you. And they need to know that God's grace covers their mistakes in that situation, and yours does too. They don't ever have to reach a point where they feel like they've done something they can't come to talk to you about. That you're always going to be there for them. The Huffington Post published a story of a survivor named Hope. She had posted on a social media site that she hated her mother. And a woman messaged her back telling her that, oh, you can come stay with me, we'll go partying. 45 minutes later, that woman showed up and Hope was gone, taken to a hotel where she was drugged, beaten, and trafficked. Praise God, 3 weeks later and 8 states away, she was rescued. But she would never be the same girl again. Social media, from the chronic everyday issues to the more severe ones, it just wasn't built for a teen's brain. It wasn't built for their underdeveloped prefrontal cortex that can't handle the situations that social media presents. Without that practice of considering the consequences of your actions, they say yes to a stranger and record themselves doing things that are inappropriate or embarrassing. And they don't think about the fact that once it's online, it's permanent, and anyone could have access to it. We didn't even get to talk about cyberbullying, fake news, social anxiety, like so many other things that could come up as a result of social media. But even with the small bit that we did cover, the question is, so what do we do, right? What do we do? How do we take a slow tech approach to this? Well, we're going to slow it way down till we get to high school. And delay is the way. I would say there's just no positive that outweighs the negatives for anyone under high school age to be on social media. They're just not ready for all it has to offer. So all those media apps, there's no place for them. Delay would be the way. That's how we can protect them. And you might say, but all my kids' friends are on Snapchat. Well, make some pacts right around you. Those 3 people you talked to earlier, shake on it, pinky promise, do whatever you do. Our kids, we won't be on social media. That way when they say, but everybody else is, you'll be like, Bob, he was at the thing, his kids are not on it. Not everybody else is, right? But jokes aside, I know that that's a real tension, right? That you'd have to figure out and walk the line with your kids of all of their friends are on Snapchat, and so what do they do if they feel that they're the only one who's not there? It comes with trade-offs, I get it. And I can't account for the variables in your situation and what that would mean for your family and your kids and their friendship circle and all of that. But I can look at the science that's coming out about the brain. I can talk to counselors, therapists, and I have. We can judge the risk that's out there, right? We can pay attention to how executives at some of the world's largest tech companies keep their kids off of social media and living a screen-free life. And I've never had a parent come to me and say, oh, Miss Anisi, I wish I had gotten my kid on social media sooner. There's just so much more that could have been done in their life. Never been told to me. Decade plus in education. Your kids might dislike it. They might hate it. But you have to be the strong one. I love what Deb said about we are their prefrontal cortex right now. Let's make these decisions for them. Take the difficult steps to protect them, their view of themselves, their faith, and their life. Now, you might come to a point in time where it's like, okay, we can get on social media. So how do we do that in a good way? I would recommend using some type of parental control. Oh, thank you. Forgot about this slide. When it comes time to say, yes, I think my kids might be ready for social media, Protect Young Guys, which is a fantastic resource. If we are on Instagram, they have an Instagram account that's really great, and it pushes out a lot of really good, helpful tips, but they also have a website, and they have an app that's really good. But anyways, they have these few questions to think through when you're ready. Okay, my child might be ready for social media. Let's process through these things. And the last one I would say is a non-negotiable. talking to them about porn, sexting, online predators, cyberbullying, making sure that they're aware of what might come across their path when they're on social media. And then after that is a resource for parental control. It's called Bark. And we're going to be referencing this app as a preventative measure throughout the presentation, so I just want to describe it a little bit. Bark monitors, and the content monitoring portion of it, text, email, YouTube, 30-plus social media apps and platforms for signs and issues like cyberbullying, sexual content, online predators, depression, suicidal ideation, threats of violence, and more. When they pick up on anything like that, they send you an alert. That way you can be aware of it. And then you can also use their screen time app to set screen time rules, limit check tech use, create custom schedules for how and when your kids can access their phone. So for example, you might say all social media is going to get turned off at 9 p.m. or no YouTube is allowed at school, or however you want to set it. You can totally set up their phone and customize it with this app. All right, thinking about the underlying resource of consistent and persistent conversations, some questions that you could ask regarding this realm of social media is, what parts of your online life transfer through to real life? And what parts don't? And why do those transfer? And why do they not? And are we okay with that? And what does that mean? You might also want to ask them, do you know that the people you're talking to online are actually those people? How do you know that they're actually those people? And have that lesson with them kind of about what stranger danger is in an internet world. All right, well, I tasked the next topic of sexual content and porn to Deb, so she's going to take it from there.
I was like, oh, yippee. And I chose this picture here, which my husband was like, why that picture? I'm like, well, I couldn't honestly think of a good picture to illustrate this, except for, I think, sexual content and porn, it draws you in. And it is something that, honestly, we were created as sexual beings, and it was created good by God. And yet the enemy has distorted it and perversed it, and it is not often, certainly in online content, what it was meant to be. I want to have a slight sidebar here, because I think in a room like this, and honestly in any room, I think it's likely that some of us in this room are currently or have struggled with porn in the past. And I think it's not to bring shame, but I think to just make it a normal conversation where one can kind of consider, okay, what does it look like to be honest with myself and with God about sin and about where I am and where I want to go. And I think it's something, too, that the enemy uses, maybe even like the story, the terrible story of, I forgot the family's name.
Montgomery.
The Montgomerys, yeah. Where it just builds upon itself into guilt, isolation, and shame, and it has a very dangerous and dark spiral down. And so I guess my encouragement here is to simply talk to someone tonight, if this is true of your experience right now, repent, and know that God's forgiveness has no ends. And I think it's something that I feel very strongly about and very passionate about personally in my own family story, but also I think being in college ministry for 20 years, most people, Christians, students who want to walk with God in a real and passionate way, most of them have watched and struggled with porn, some to very, very, very detrimental degrees. And these are students who are in our churches. These are students who are at the school. These are students who, one day, this will happen to them. And so I think it's without, there's no guessing that it has probably happened to some of us as well. I think as parents, though, don't let your own story inhibit you from parenting. Because I think God wants to give you grace and wants to give your children grace. And so we need to confront it head on. My parents have never talked to me about sex. I've been married for nearly 20 years, and not once have we had a conversation about sex, whether I was in high school or all the times I've had children or whatever. And so Dan and I, my husband and I, we're trying to normalize with our own kids. Let's talk about this. This is not something that we need to be sheepish about. Thinking through specifically sexual content, explicit content, and porn, there's a couple of reasons fightthenewdrug.org mentioned of why maybe kids and adults, I think, are drawn to it. And I think these are just good things to kind of consider here. The four are arousal, education, coping with negative emotions, and boredom. And I think it's good to kind of consider what those might be, because I think we can talk with our kids about negative emotions and kind of nix that one off, right? Helping our kids being okay with boredom and helping them find ways to do fun and cool things with friends or even by themselves when they're bored. Educate is these conversations. Be the one to educate. Be the one to talk to your kids about things that they're going to probably find out anyways, and certainly eventually. And then I think arousal, teach them about God's pattern and way for sex. And I think by kind of addressing what are some of the things that draw people into porn, and specifically kids, we can kind of lay the foundation before they're even exposed. Here's a staggering statistic, though. 73%. 73% of teens have viewed porn. And I don't know what you want to think about that number in terms of Redwood Christian schools. I know it's not zero. And you can say some number between 0 and 73%, probably not more, but it's not zero. And so I think for us to come in with our eyes wide open of what does it look like to have these conversations where it's very difficult to have, certainly as parents and teachers, but I think extremely necessary. 54% of those 73% reported that they saw porn before age 13. 12 is actually the average. And I think it is probably trending even younger as younger kids are having access to devices. So if that number doesn't cause you to step back and say, okay, what do I need to do as a parent to protect my kids and to lay a good foundation? I'm not quite sure what else will. More than half of teens, interestingly also, found porn online by accident. They were not actually even looking to go look for porn, but by mistyping something, by something coming up on their thread or whatever it might be, it popped up. And so I think this is even more of a reason for us to just continue these conversations, continue talking about it. Another interesting stat here, 20% of online video content is explicit. There's lots of data now about the amount of videos online that are related to porn compared to, let's say, rugs or something else very mundane. It's absolutely insane. And I think it's because the enemy knows what is a huge draw for men and women, it's not just boys, it's not just men, to draw them away from their creator and to get them caught into a vicious cycle of sin. And so I think there's things that we can do to help with this. This is a little quote here, but intentional, curious, caring conversations about everything, including technology, are the most effective parental controls you can use. There are things that we will mention, but I think this is where it's like, a weekly conversation, I don't think is too extreme. I think it will take you can't just start going from nothing if you haven't had this conversation to bring it up every Friday night, but I think you can trend upwards and continue to increase. Because I think it's a shameful conversation if we let it be. But if we normalize what sex is and what God created it to be and how it's good and where it brings intimacy and how we can find it, then I think it no longer becomes this hidden in the dark situation or something that your kid would never share with you. In terms of a response that you might have if your child does happen to say, hey, I saw something online, I'm not even sure what it was. That's the other thing about porn and explicit content is often kids don't even know what they're looking at. They don't even know what it is, let alone if you haven't talked about it, but it's a very confusing thing. So if they bring it up, and certainly if it's something that they were seeking out, keep your composure. Sometimes I laugh in very awkward situations because I don't know what to do, but your facial expressions, your empathy and your care, and most importantly saying, nothing that you can tell me will make me love you any less. And that's the same with the Lord, is that there's nothing that we can do where he will be like, oh, that is the final straw. I'm done. But instead, if we model God's grace and model his forgiveness and model what it looks like in our conversations, then I think it's really freeing to talk with our kids. The same way that porn entails or ensnails, let's say high school students, college students, and men and women as they get older, I think the same is true for kids. But their brains are not fully developed. So I think they don't have the ability to say no. They don't have the ability to walk away. One of the slides here, I guess we're on it right now. I love this one. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit of life set me free from the law of sin and death. I love that phrase, there is now no condemnation. And I think for you and for your children, that is one of the biggest ways that you can represent grace to them. Some ideas of what you can do. Again, we've already mentioned this, but talk about it. There's a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures we're giving away for free, and I think another version more for younger kids. But this is a great starter book to kind of get you, more experienced in having these conversations, and something that you can use, a tool you can use with your kids. Another thing is safe devices. These routers and phones, they are made to protect kids from explicit content. By no means are they, foolproof, but they are certainly helpful. And then these parental controls that we've already talked about. Bark does cost money, clean browsing does not. I have not used either, but I think that's something that in a room this size, hopefully somebody has, and we can learn from each other on what these are like in our own homes. The last thing here is tips number 3. So I've already mentioned this, but normalize talking to your kids regularly and often about sex and porn. Bring the conversation back to the gospel. I think this is one that I cannot emphasize enough because the level of shame that is attached to sex and porn, whether they find it accidentally or they become in some way even mildly addicted to it. Keep device usage in public spaces. Like, don't let them take their phones to their room. Don't let them have their phones at night. Don't have extended times where you don't know what's going on or what they're looking at. And then use technology to protect kids from porn and from their own technology. I think that is a great way to kind of say, okay, technology has a lot of wins of what it can do to protect us.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking about when wanting to give kids safe devices and keep them from the dangers of inappropriate content is I've often seen parents hand their phone to their child. Maybe they're in a meeting and the child needs to be occupied for a minute, or they're having their child look something up on the phone or whatnot. But I just wondered, do you have all of those child protections set on your phone before you hand your phone to your child? Or are you giving them one that has free reign to Google or free reign to those other things? Just something to think about. Anytime they get a device, is it a device that's protected? All right, the next topic we're going to tackle is screen time, and we're going to start with video games. The book Glow Kids by Dr. Nicholas Kardaras was very helpful for me in explaining why video games are so addictive. Did anybody here when they were younger play the game Sim Tower or Sim City? Couple. Okay, great. I found my generation. Sim Tower is a game where you can build up this like skyscraper tower, and you can put in like a movie theater and restaurants and hotels and condos, and then it earns you money and people come, and it's a little simulated life in there, right? I loved it as a kid. As an adult, I refound a similar thing as an app for my phone. And I was a full-fledged adult with like a full-on job, and I found myself one day while I was working being like, I wonder how much money my movie theater made today. And I was like, what just happened? And I went to my phone, deleted the game, and I'm like, what's going on? Why am I thinking about a game in the middle of my workday? So reading this book by Dr. Kardaras was like super helpful, and he answers the question what it is about digital games like this that are so addicting. He refers to them as the digital drug. Video games, they did studies on it in like the 90s, so some pretty basic video games, but those ones raised dopamine levels by 100% increase, which is a lot. And natural dopaminergic activities like eating, that gives you also those feel-good moments, right? They usually come after effort or delay, but addictive behaviors are providing a shortcut to that reward process. And so when you're playing this video game and you up to the next level, or you get that extra movie theater, now you're allowed for like 4-bedroom hotel suites, because you unlock that privilege. That's what's getting you that dopamine. And Deb talked earlier about how then it becomes a dopamine onslaught to your receptor cells. And they're like, we don't know what to do with all this dopamine. So your brain releases less. But then you're like, but I love that feeling. So then you need more. And so it's just this like never-ending cycle that's happening. Dr. Peter Wybrow, who's UCLA's director of the Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, describes the dynamic in this way. Our brains are wired for finding immediate reward. With technology, novelty is the reward. You essentially become addicted to novelty. Take Minecraft, for example. That's a current fave around here. It's an ever-increasing, never-ending game of limitless possibilities. I mean, that's just going to keep you going forever, right? It creates that very hypnotic grip on kids of like wanting to keep finding the next, you know what? I haven't played Minecraft, but whatever it is they're searching for in that little cube world, they want to find it. And that pull, along with the stimulating, hyper arousal that's happening, creates that dopamine increasing effect. And this was something that I found, I just couldn't believe it was true. I read it in the book, and then I searched it online just to make sure. But the University of Washington Medical Center is using virtual reality video games in place of narcotics in its severe burns unit. And which military was it? In 2011, I didn't tell me which branch, but the military conducted a small study using the video game Snow World and found these results. For their soldiers in the most severe pain, Snow World worked even better than morphine. We're replacing these highly addictive narcotics with video games, and it makes me think, if video games can be as powerful as morphine, can they also be as addicting? And if so, what effect are they having on a young developing brain? Of course, these are just questions, but interesting questions. And it makes me think about screen time in general, not just video games. But if we don't make screen time this intentional act here, it's going to start taking over our lives, right? Video games can be addicting, but so can social media, so can Netflix. Like, so many of these things just draw us in, and we continue on it. And so we got to think, are we using screen time with purpose, or is it just the default nature, right? Has screens become our babysitters, boredom solvers, emotional pacifiers? Sure, the car ride will be quieter and the waiting room easier to manage if you have screens, but at what cost does it come? Sometimes the cost is worth it, right? You're like, dinner's got to get on the table, we're putting on a show for you. I get it. But if it's the regular default that we're going to, that's something we need to consider. Too much screen time will start fostering that dependence on screens to get through the day. It prevents children from getting in the habit of noticing and engaging with the world around them, and eventually the slow-moving nature of reality, they just can't even manage, right? The brain gets used to being constantly stimulated. Thinking about situations I've seen where kids are starting to get fussy or complaining or arguing back, right? And then a parent's like, oh, here, do you want to watch Netflix? Immediate, oh, yeah. They're just totally calm, right? What is it about that? It's become their coping mechanism. And I know I've done the same, right? I get home, I'm stressed, I'm like, this brain's maxed out. Like, can't do much else right now except for sit and watch a show. Or I maybe have stress levels that I let Netflix take care of for me. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I have a prefrontal cortex and a faith in God that eventually get my attention and guide me to making the right choices with those things that I'm feeling there. And rather than letting the screen regulate my emotions or handle my stress, I'm able to address it in a better way, a healthier way, right? But a child who spent their entire childhood being soothed by technology is going to have strong connections for those pathways in their brain. And they'll have a much harder time dealing with simple disappointments. There's also quite a bit of research around the connection between a child's screen time diet and their ability to show emotional regulation, attentiveness, or focus. 2 studies stood out to me. One was by the Indiana University School of Medicine. They took a group of people who are non-gamers, and they did a brain scan on them at the beginning of the week. Then they instructed them to play 10 hours of video games, and they did another brain scan on them at the end of the week. And they found that the second scan showed less activation in 2 specific areas of the brain, insert big medical technical words. And those 2 areas are instrumental in impulsivity and emotional regulation. It shows a correlation between significant time spent gaming and our ability to have that emotional regulation and impulsivity control. Another study is being done by child psychiatrist Dr. Dunkley. She conceptualized what she calls electronic screen syndrome, a disorder of dysregulation where children are unable to modulate their moods, attention, or level of arousal in appropriate or healthy manner. And she found that many of those patients suffered from sensory overload, lack of restorative sleep, hyper-aroused nervous system, regardless of what underlying diagnosis they have. So she started prescribing tech fast to over 500 of the kids that came to her clinic. And 80% of those kids, of those 500 kids who had underlying psychiatric disorders, whatever they might be, varying ones, of that group of kids who had an underlying diagnosis, 80% of them found that their symptoms were reduced by half when they went on a tech fast for 4 weeks. No change in medication, no nothing else. But half their symptoms reduced from a tech fast. Then from our other patients who did not have an underlying diagnosis, but went on the tech fast, their symptoms were resolved almost completely. And so while removing screens may not be the magic key, like it's not definitively going to solve a child's struggle with paying attention or regulating their emotions, I think it's definitely worth a try, right? Over the last decade in education, I've seen a major increase in the number of kids that have difficulty focusing, difficulty sitting through the hard process of learning something new, and struggling through that, difficulty with focus. And I would say if we encounter, that might be happening in your child, a great free way, something to try, is putting them on a tech fast and seeing what results might we get there. And honestly, this applies to us too. I mean, I know I spend too much time on screens. And hopefully there will be some people who might agree with me and can commiserate in that. It's a very big temptation to get sucked in, and we could all stand to have better guidelines with our technology use. And so I think we got to think about, we can't ask our kids to do something that we're not willing to do, right? So you might be wondering, how much screen time is Snacy? We got to limit it. Like what? Give me a number. And I can't do that, obviously. I have no clue what your family dynamics are, what the needs are, what's going on there. But here are some things that almost everybody agrees about. Number one, less is better. Less is most certainly uncomfortably harder than you would want it to be, but it is better. And so getting used to that. Number two, under 2 years old would mean 0 sedentary screen time. And the third thing that almost everyone agrees on is that how adults use tech impacts how kids use tech. And so again, I just want to ask us, are we holding ourselves to those same things? Maybe you say, as a family, we're going to have screen-free car rides because that's going to foster that imagination. It's going to help you get curious about your world. It's going to teach you to be aware of your surroundings. And we might even have a good conversation in the car. Imagine all the conversations we could have in the car if screens were put away. So if you are a family who's going to implement that rhythm into your household of screen-free car rides, it would also apply to the adult in the passenger seat and the driver's seat. I shouldn't have to say that, but also in the driver's seat, right? And as we're thinking about being role models, one kind of concept to consider is this digital vegetables versus digital candy. When we do allow them screen time, because again, it's not terrible in and of itself, and yes, putting a show on, having a Friday night movie night, or letting the kids watch something while you get dinner on the table, can be great. Let's think about what kinds of tech are we giving them. There's a difference between Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which again is a show I grew up on, from the cartoons of today that are so fast-paced, quick scene cuts, loud music, frantic things going on, right? There's a difference there. Are the shows we are watching educational, or are they not? What kinds of attitudes do the kids have in the shows that we're watching that we might start seeing emulated in our own kids' lives? So when you're choosing to spend time watching a show, are we choosing those captivating, good stories? If it's something that annoys you, it's probably not good for your kid. Pick something else, right? And then keep in mind the power of presence. You won't forever be able to keep the brokenness of the world away from your kids. So when the brokenness enters through the movies or shows that they're watching, be there. Be part of it with them so you can address it when it comes up and have those critical conversations. All right, tips number 4, some things to keep in mind. 1, limit screen time. And not only can you actually limit it in the settings so that their device powers down and is unusable after 60 minutes of screen time or whatever it is you set it to, but also limit it in your regular family rhythms. Be a family that's not Screen time is any time. You know, your kids are constantly asking, can I use the iPad? Can I use the iPad? But be a family that's like, after dinner is screen time, right? So like beforehand it's not, or car rides are screen free, or Friday night is movie night, or whatever it might be. Think, how can we intentionally put screen time in a certain box versus just always able to be accessed in our family? Secondly, before putting any game or app on your child's phone, use it yourself. And if it's a game, work through the levels. Play over the course of several days. See what ads come, what permissions are unlocked. Is there ability to chat with other people? Can other people reach out and join in on the game you're playing? Figure all of that out and see what kind of influences your kids might be getting. Talk about it. Continue that conversation. Again, your most powerful tool. Talk about how much time do people you know spend gaming? Do you think that's too much, too little? What are your thoughts? Just get it going there. Alternatives, Deb talked about all the things that are helpful for our brains. Have those alternatives going. And when you don't have the energy to get that creative play going, that's fine. Let them be bored. It's good for their brain, right? Let them be bored. And I don't know about you, but my mom always had a running list of chores. And anytime we went and we're like, we're bored, we got a chore. So we rarely told her we were bored, and we found things to do. That's just a little tip if you want to try it in your house. And then lastly, let them work through their emotional distress. It might be easier to calm them down by putting a show in front of them or letting them play a game on their iPad. But in the long run, you're stunting their growth. And they're going to grow up to be adults who don't know how to handle that. And they're going to think the only antidote to my frustration right now is mom's flashing iPhone. And they need to be able to figure out how to handle those emotions in other healthier ways. Limiting screen time when your child's been used to it is going to be difficult. It's going to be more than difficult. It might be one of the hardest things you have to do yet in parenting. But the payoff is worth it. Remember your vision. Do you want them to be a child who's disciplined, who's diligent, who has integrity? What are the practices we need to put in place now to help them reach that character and skill development that you're aiming for? And so on that note, Deb's going to talk to us a bit about parenting.
Just a couple minutes of parenting and co-parenting because we want to get to Q&A. And I think this is without saying, all of you guys are here tonight, so you're taking an active look into reading things, learning things, discussing things with friends. And I think some of the things here with parenting is keep up those conversations, keep up that hard work. With parenting with a spouse, I think it's really good to do that together, to get on the same page, to make decisions that you both agree on, and to not have one person be the disciplinarian and the other just kind of let things go. It's really helpful to have someone who, when you're tired or when you're busy, they're able to go and check for phones, plug this in, take that, what are you doing? So I think working as a team is essential in all parts of parenting, but especially technology, and I think these hard decisions. The reality is, if you would to take any of these tips into practice, there's going to be confrontation with your kids because they want to spend 7 hours or more on their devices or on various ways of being online or on screens. And so if you say less is better and we want to pull back, there's going to be difficulty. And I think going into those conversations prepared with your spouse, that's very helpful. Some of you might have a former spouse be co-parenting together. And I think this is where you can really only control your own home and the decisions that you're making, in your space. But the most that you can doing that together, deciding when to buy a phone, what to put on the phone, having these conversations for the best of the child, I would highly recommend. And it might be, you might come from very different decision points or views. And so there will have to be compromise and there will have to be adjustment. But I think you can say, okay, in our home or in my house, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to try and figure out how that can be a steady experience from house to house. But I think it is important to try and come up with decisions together. Lastly here, remember the vision for your child. Psalm 1 talks about a tree planted by streams of water and the type of person that is rich in virtues and characteristics. And maybe some of the words and phrases that you even wrote down on your vision. And I think if you were to keep your vision before you in terms of creating these habits, not the big decisions on what age are we going to get our kid a phone, but in more so the daily habits, the rhythms, the patterns of life, I think those are the things that will create a healthy and thriving adult in many years to come. And lastly, just reminding you of Romans 12:2. It says this, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. On that note, we want to bring up a couple others to answer any Q&A. I think there are some questions that are already in the hopper, but if not, if you didn't get a chance to do that, we do want to just take an opportunity to still share your questions, and not that we have perfect answers, but some thoughts.
Yeah, you can scan that QR code that's in the notes to be able to submit a question. Has anybody come in that had notes, that had a Post-it note stuck to it that said, you're the winner? Did anybody come in later and see? No. Oh, in the stack? Oh, okay, great. No problem. We'll pick more from the questions that came in. Also, while our panel is getting up here and getting the mics that they need and getting situated, you might have noticed the shirt that I'm wearing. When I was in the 4th grade, my teacher, Mr. Stallinga, gave us a 2-month challenge to pull the plug for 2 months from TV. Of course, we didn't have cell phones then. The only tech that needed to be done away with was a TV. But for 2 months long, he challenged us to have no TV, no movies. And if we made it that whole time, then we got to go to this party, we got ice cream. He took one of those old-fashioned TVs and banged it up, and it was a whole moment. But we also got T-shirts from it, and when I was preparing for this, I was like, yeah, wow, okay, that's been something that since 4th grade has been there, tucked away, and maybe it has been part of what I'm thinking about technology. So I'm going to do a similar challenge for our kiddos at RCE. Not 2 months, so you're welcome. But we are going to have a little unplugged challenge coming up. We're going to wait till the weather's good so that we can put them outside and let them play and run off their energy. And we're going to send you home with lots of ideas of what you can do in place of technology. But I thought it might be good to challenge ourselves and see, can we get through 1 week? And I was just talking to my roommate about it the other day and being like, oh man, I don't know if I can go a week without solitaire and all these things that I just do on my phone. She's like, we're going to be doing lots of puzzles in here, going for hikes. But I think it'll just be a healthy practice that way. All right, Dr. Hearn, do you have any names from questions that we can do our giveaways with? I'm going to do that, and then we'll start answering these questions. Oh, nice. Click to spin. Okay, can you set it up on this table? Thank you. Ooh, okay, we got a little spinner wheel here. Our first winner is for the TechWise family, Belinda Dong. Hey! Congrats. All right. Oh, the computer's clapping as well. Good job. Okay, next up, we're going to do Glow Kids for this one. Shirley Chung. Okay. And for one of these versions, depending on how old your kids are, younger, slightly older, we have Scott S. Okay, let's see. Probably this one. Yeah, good. Okay. If you have 8 to 12 years old, Carrie Kaufman, which one would you like? Eventually they'll be 8 to 12. Is that okay?
Thank you,
okay, great. And for our last copy of the TechWise family, Bev Main. All right, nice. Okay, so we're gonna get started with some questions that y'all have put in, and in this order would be good? Okay, great. So, actually I'm gonna move this whole thing right over here. Just pardon me a moment. Oh yeah, okay. All right, question number 1 for our panelists. Can you quickly explain your family's screen time and cell phone practice? And we'll start with Dr. Hearn, and we'll go this way.
I have 3 boys, ages 4, 9, and 11. I tell them they can't have a cell phone until they go away to college, and then it's so they can call their mother. They each have their own iPad in the house, and Megan and I, we vary on this from week to week, but we try to set this iPad screen time for an hour a day when they can use their iPads. And I have the parent content filtering on and control what apps they can and cannot install.
I have a 4, 6, and 8-year-old in the house, so I'm navigating the younger stages. I know we talked a lot about teens, but we're not quite there yet, thankfully. The way that we kind of run our family tech time is really through rhythms that they have come to know and expect, and we found that works best with their little ages of rather than asking, can I watch a show, can I watch a show, can I look at this, can I do this, can I do this? There's a piece where we have found, like, okay, they have come to know that Friday night or Saturday night is a family movie night. That immediately eliminates every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Are they going to ask me, can we watch a movie? They also know that when, like, mommy or daddy have a meeting on Zoom or we have to do something and they need to be quiet, they get to watch a show. And so we have, we've come to find that if we can create rhythms of engagement where they know this is what's coming at their age, that they can understand that. They know that if we're going in the car to go somewhere, like we talked about car-free rides, that they cannot be on it. But if we're going on an airplane, you better believe that they each get to watch a movie. And so that has been what's worked really well for our kids at their ages. And it's proved to be beneficial for our family and our season.
I have a lot of kids. I don't remember how old they all are, but let me just say, I think I was born in '81, and it's pretty evident that my parents didn't realize, but now we do realize, that the digital age is the single greatest technological transformation probably since the advent of electricity as a usable vehicle for momentum. Maybe since the printing press, in terms of technological transformation of the world. My parents just had a computer that they put in a room and said, hey, anyone can go use it whenever they want. And I think that as we come to grapple with this reality, there's a lot of like theological and philosophical concepts that are up for debate. And so I'm just going to do a quick plug. If you are interested not just in the practical application, but in like the theological principles of what it means to live in this digital reality, that, you know, if you paid attention to the new artificial intelligence stuff with Gemini, I mean, literally reshaping not just how you use technology, but how you understand reality itself, right? It's a book called Human Forever, and it's by a guy named James Poulos, and I just want to recommend it to you. You can only buy it through Bitcoin, which is its own unique thing. But just want to share that with you, because I do think that the next 50 years of your children's lives are going to be so different from the first 50 years of your life that it's like inconceivable to you, right? It'd be like someone around Gutenberg's press being like, what do I need to read for? That's what those monks do in the monastery. And by the time their children are their age, there's books everywhere. And the inability to read means that you are eliminated from whole facets of life. So what do? We try to limit screen time, 30 minutes on iPads during the weekend to play games per kid. TV is a little more flexible with that just because it's a very, very, very small house and there's only one TV. So you're going to fight over what you're going to watch, so no one's going to be happy anyway. And then in terms of cell phones, my oldest got a cell phone as a freshman in high school. It's a flip phone. It has 0 apps available to him, no social media. And he's excited because he's the only kid in the high school with a flip phone, but next year his brother's a freshman, and he'll also have a flip phone. So more than one.
Thanks. And Deb, your family's screen time and cell phone practice.
Yes, so we waited to get an actual phone with a phone number for our daughter until 15 and a half in hopes that she would be somewhat able to use it well and then drive. As a quick sidebar, we were practicing driving between 15 and a half and 16 just this last 6 months, and Be Real went off. And she's like, oh, we got to pull over. I got to take my Be Real. I'm like, oh my gosh, this cannot happen. This is very, very bad decision making on your part to be driving as a permit holder and consider Be Real. So that's a different story. But our youngest and our middle have phones. The younger, I think, has like an iPhone 4, so it barely turns on. The other one has an iPhone 8. They're our old phones. And they don't have phone numbers, but they're able to, well, the younger doesn't text anybody, but the middle one, who's 14, does text friends and whatnot. But we have been much slower to let our kids have phones, which is very unpopular, to be honest. And it's something that I think with each of them, you know, my daughter was called iPad girl for middle school because she didn't have a phone. And I'm like, you know what? I think you should take that with pride, because there are some things that, you know, are unusual and maybe decisions that don't make sense to you or others, but that's okay. And I hope that this continues to happen in life where you're making different choices. So that's one of the things we did.
Teenagers love it when we tell them to take pride in the names kids call them.
Yeah. I forgot to introduce, actually, all the members of our panel. Mr. Redmer is our high school principal, for those of you who are not aware. And then Alicia Barnhart is just a good, longtime friend of mine and somebody whose family I've been watching and get an inside look at, and whose tech practices I admire. And so I just asked her to be a part of this. Her husband does work at our high school as well, Evan Barnhart. All right, there was a question that came through wondering if the session is going to be recorded. Yes, it is being recorded. It'll be posted. It'll be on our YouTube. I'm sure we'll link it on our website as well, and we'll push it out to everybody. Look for the Eagle Update. All the things you need to know are in the Eagle Update, right? So check that out. All right, next question. It seems like the negatives are really only extreme scenarios. Are we overreacting with saying that we need to put all these precautions in place? This doesn't have to be answered by all four, but if maybe one or two of you had a thought.
I mean, I think like all tools, right? You know, the tools are necessary and can be good, right? Digital technology is fundamentally a tool. Now, it's more of a powerful tool than any tool we've made this far, but it is a tool. However, like all tools, it can be used for great evil. Yes, right? That new Oppenheimer movie, whatever, the guy says, like, I am death, destroyer of worlds, right? He suddenly realizes that this technology can be used for horrifying evil. And I think the same way digital technology can, right? But just because the shears that I give my children to garden can cut off their fingers doesn't mean I should like hide them from ever using them. But instead, it should mean that I teach them appropriate and responsible use, right? And then entrust them